Good morning, Tristan. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation around the work that you're doing in the state of Louisiana. So to kick us off, I'd love to hear just your background and what's led you to the state of Louisiana. And then we'll jump right into the very impactful work that you've been doing there over the last couple of years.
It's a real pleasure to be here today. So Tristan Denley, I'm Deputy Commissioner for Academic Affairs and Innovation at the Louisiana Board of Regents. I've been here at the coordinating board in Louisiana working with the 28 universities and colleges here in the state for now a little bit more than 3 years. But before that, I've had kind of a journey that's taken me really all across the world. So I was a research mathematician by trade and had a career for a number of years that took me to Sweden and Canada, and ended up at the University of Mississippi as a math professor there, and then gradually worked my way into administration. So I was the department chair back at the University of Mississippi. And then from there, moved to be provost at Austin Peay State University. And that kind of transition was really sort of helpful in some of the work that I'm now doing. The reality is that when I was department chair there at Ole Miss, I worked hard on thinking about new ways to help students be successful in math courses. It was sort of first time that I realized that this was a really significant barrier that students had to being able to complete their degrees. And so we worked hard on trying to find some new ways to be able to use technology and individualized instruction, and using technology, the sort of math technologies and learning softwares to really help students be more successful in math. When I meant to be provost there at Austin Peay, kind of broaden that scale. Of course, the reality is that students find math challenging sometimes, but there's other ways in which the way that the university is set up that often kind of get in the way and don't allow students to be successful. And so at Austin Peay, we really tried to find a much more holistic approach to trying to help students be more successful in college. And there was some success to that. And the lessons that I was able to learn there in Tennessee at Austin Peay, I was able to take to the Tennessee Board of Regents, which was the management board for all the state universities and colleges there in Tennessee. And while I was there, we were then able to kind of to refine some of these strategies. That's really where the co-requisite approach to math and English really found its feet, and we were all, able to, for the first time, kind of scale that across the state there in Tennessee. And from there moved to Georgia and worked with the University System of Georgia institutions, all the universities and colleges there in Georgia. And again, taking those ideas to a new level, trying to knit those student strategies together to try to improve student success and completion. And then from Georgia, I've now found myself here in Louisiana trying to do similar kind of work here.
Well, Tristan, I think we have like the Southeast in common. So I grew up in Mississippi and went to the other university in the state of Mississippi. So I graduated from Mississippi State in educational psychology a long time ago, and then was in Arkansas for a little bit. So you've gone from Mississippi, Tennessee, Georgia, Louisiana, which are all really important states for educational outcomes and upward mobilities. And so those states tend to have just a bigger gap when it comes to outcomes for student attainment, student access to college education. And so you're doing some really incredible work. So in your role now, what reforms have you been a part of since you've been at Louisiana Board of Regents for the last 3 years?
Yeah, so here in Louisiana, my main work is really to quarterback the master plan here in Louisiana. Back in 2019, the Louisiana Board of Regents approved a new master plan called Louisiana Prospers.
And in that master plan, they lay out a really audacious attainment goal to move Louisiana's educational attainment for working age adults to 60% by 2030. At the time, the attainment rate there in Louisiana was around 46%, and as you say, among the lowest educational attainment rates for adults in the United States. And more than that, as you say, even as you look at that attainment rate, it varies quite considerably across different populations in the state. So, people in rural areas, different races and genders, and then this attainment rate varied quite considerably, and there were quite significant disparities in that attainment rate. So, what I've been trying to do is to really double down on what we can do a statewide scale to be able to move that attainment rate. And really, the important thing about that is recognizing that in 2030 we anticipate that 60% of the jobs that people will be doing will need some kind of credential past high school. What we actually know is I've looked at the job advertisement data here in Louisiana, is the future's already here. Last year, it was already the case that more than 68% of the jobs that employers posted here in Louisiana already were asking for a credential past high school. And so in that sense, of course, not all of the jobs. There are plenty of people who are in jobs and have been in jobs, and so it isn't quite the case that all of the jobs that people are doing, 60% now, require a post-secondary credential. But the new jobs, the jobs that are being posted right now, the vast majority of them are seeking that attainment. And so it really is important for us to do everything that we can to enable more people, as you say, to have access and have success in earning the credential that they need to transform their lives and their families' lives, both today and in the future.
Yeah, so Tristan, the Louisiana Prosper master plan, I think you guys just wrapped up year 5 for that strategic plan for the state. And you've made some pretty impressive gains. And so you mentioned that 46% attainment in 2019. You're over 51% attainment at this point, like halfway through that master plan. What do you think, like the top 2 or 3 things that you guys have done over these last 5 years to move the needle in such a short period of time?
Yeah, you're exactly right. So we are now at a state all-time high of 51%. Just to put that in perspective, I think it's really important to think through each 1% increase in that statewide attainment rate is 23,000 people. So in other words, from where we began when the master plan was approved to today, I think a good way to think of that is it's a whole Superdome, packed house of the Superdome full of people who now all have a credential that didn't have one before. I think that's kind of a cool image, a way to be able to viscerally understand. And of course, as you say, this impacts that many families' lives, both today and going forward. So the things that we've really been looking to do are, first of all, to increase college going. Here in Louisiana, college going, both for students right out of high school and for returning adults too, has been on a steady decline for more than a decade. And of course, there's no way that we're going to be able to get to that attainment rate if fewer and fewer and fewer people are being involved in college and finding their dreams in college. And so lots of strategies to try to turn that hockey stick around, to make it so that we could make more people look to higher education as being the ticket to their career dreams. And we have had a significant amount of success to this. That we, for high school students, the big strategy has really been around dual enrollment. How many more students begin their college studies while they're in high school, really utilizing that strategy that we know that if people begin college and find success at the college level in high school, they're much more likely to then continue that after high school. And so we have seen now 3 years in a row double-digit percentage increases in students being involved in dual enrollment. And now, for the very first time, the most recent data that we have has turned that college going rate for high school students around exactly as we had hoped. So this dual enrollment strategy that we were employing is really paying dividends and is really, really working. Similarly, we have strategies to try to re-engage adult students. And so here in Louisiana, we have a new adult financial aid program called the MJ Foster program. And that program provides tuition support for people who don't yet have a credential if they're over the age of 20. And again, we're in year 3 of that. This year we served that scholarship is providing support to more people this year than in the first 2 years combined. But we've already seen a tremendous impact for that program. Last year, more than 1,200 people actually earned a brand new credential they didn't have before. The remaining, about the same 1,300 people who were also supported are well on their way to earning that credential in this calendar year. And then when we look at the impact of that on families, what we know is the people who are served by that scholarship, most of them, 70% of them, before they entered the program, had a family income that was below the ALICE threshold, below the threshold that is a survivability threshold here in Louisiana. What we know is that after they complete the program, 70% of them are well above that threshold. In fact, have increased their family income by more than $20,000. So it is a really powerful, very impactful program. So college going increasing. At the other end of the strategy is really recognizing all of the different credentials, because the reality is that for a long time in Louisiana and in lots of other states too, we really have recognized all of the credentials that begin with D, right? Degrees and diplomas. But we really haven't done much of a good job of recognizing all the credentials that begin with C, certificates, certifications, short-term workforce credentials, all of those kinds of things. And so we really have, on the one hand, tried to really build out the capacity to be able to collect information and introduce strategies that enable people to be able to find begin their educational journey in those short-term credentials, making sure that as they do that those short-term credentials actually open other doors. So if they choose to, they can continue on with their education to earn some of those credentials that begin with D. But that has been a really big sea change, to recognize that today the portfolio of degrees offered in higher education is so much broader than it ever was in the past. And then in the middle, and I think this is kind of where it is we're headed to talk more about, is what can we do about, if we're going to help people begin that journey of higher education towards one of those credentials that we're now recognizing, how can we help more of them be successful in that journey, not just enroll, but actually be successful. And so a whole suite of different strategies in trying to enable people to be successful and more successful than they've been in the past.
Thank you. And you're right. We're talking today about the kind of middle part of like the strategies that you guys have employed in Louisiana over the past few years. And so we have a project that fits within your master plan and your momentum framework that you've created in Louisiana that focuses on this innovative solution to help increase student success by way of persistence and completion. And you've called this these Catapult courses that you guys have created or looking at within the state of Louisiana. So for this interview, that's the focus, that project, and to share with the field what Catapult courses are and how they have the ability to improve success for students. So what are Catapult courses, and how do they impact institution-wide persistence and completion? And tell us why you're excited about these types of courses.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. So the idea here is to say, okay, look, if we look at the structure of the curriculum in higher education, what can we learn by looking at that structure? And so an analysis that I did a few years ago really recognizes that, first of all, an observation about that structure, which that structure has a structure that's sort of well known in mathematical circles. It's called a small world network, and it may well be that people are familiar with that. Maybe not with that terminology, but maybe you're familiar with the 6 degrees of separation or the Kevin Bacon game or something like that. This is the structure that has. And what we know about that network structure is that, first of all, there are particular nodes in a network like that where they are utterly critical, that if we remove those nodes, everything falls apart very quickly. But if we're able to shore up those nodes and maybe amplify the effect of those nodes, things go the other way. Then things are actually much better. Similarly, phenomena flow across a network that's a small world network in a really important way. That if you flow that phenomenon from particular nodes, the whole network can be infected really immediately. Again, if you don't pick the right ones, then the effect is dissipated. So that idea has been sort of led me to then look at, well, what are those critical nodes in the network of the higher education curriculum structure? And those are the Catapult courses. The Catapult courses are, on the one hand, the courses where lack of success infects the whole rest of the curriculum almost immediately and things all fall apart. On the other hand, increasing success, deepening learning in these particular courses not only helps students to be successful in those particular courses, but actually improves their learning across the whole of their educational journey and increases graduation rate writ large. And so that's the idea that, for a long time in higher education, we kind of looked at this idea of what we call gateway courses or gatekeeper courses that are sort of saying, okay, so what is the roadblock? And if people get tripped up here, then things don't end well. And I think, we've all recognized that math and English sort of fall into those categories. And it's been a lot of movement around trying to recognize what we might do there. Catapult courses is sort of looking at the flip side of this and saying, okay, so what are the courses on a particular campus, perhaps in a particular program, where by deepening the learning in those courses, of course, by deepening the learning in those courses, you're going to help more people be successful in that particular course. But what we want is more. What are those courses where by deepening the learning in that particular course, we actually help people be successful in earning the credential that they came to earn in the first place? And those are the Catapult courses.
So it sounds like it's like a asset based approach to what we know is gateway or gatekeeper courses. That term has been used in the past for the English and math, but these are courses that are identified on a individual campus that will propel the student to the finish line. So they are going to propel them or accelerate, if they can get this course right and be successful in this course, then their chances of persisting and completing their credential of value increases greatly.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So how did you stumble across this in your research? I know you mentioned you're a mathematics professor, and then how did you stumble into this? And then how do you identify the courses for the institutions in Louisiana? And could other states or institutions in other states replicate this model given their context?
Yes, great question. So stumbling into it, yeah. So when I was a research mathematician, graph theory was kind of that was the area of mathematics that I was involved in. So thinking in this kind of structural, networky kind of language is kind of a natural way for me. I think often people talk about, well, are you working in your field? They don't ask often enough, are you bringing your field to your work? And so this was a natural thing for me to just kind of to think about it through that lens. And so I happened to call the kind of this network, this small world network approach to the curriculum, a natural question then to ask, well, what are these, these critical nodes that are in a network like that? The analysis to identify these Catapult courses, it sort of goes in the sort of really looks to see, well, okay, first of all, to look to see what are to associate academic learning with outcomes. In other words, looking to see how the grades, in this case, because that data is ubiquitous, the grades that students earn in particular courses impacts or is connected with the graduation rates that they have. And we've known this for, I think, quite some time, really, to say, well, okay, look, if we look at all the graduation rates of students who earn an A in this particular course and compare it with the graduation rates of students who earn a B or a C or a D or an F, you can well imagine that those graduation rates might be really different from each other. So looking to make that connection, that's the sort of the first stage. And then the second stage was, as you say, this more asset-based approach to say, well, what if we envisaged making some curricular change? What if we envisaged making some hypothetical change in pedagogy in this course that actually shifted that grade distribution? In other words, deepening the learning in that course. Can we then assess, well, if you did that kind of deepening in learning, well, what kind of impact would that then have on the graduation rate, because the impact that earning those grades has right now. So it's making that kind of connection. And so that's the analysis. I just literally do that, an analysis like that for all the thousands of courses that there are at a particular institution. And then from there, you're able to fish out which are the courses which, on the one hand, by deepening the learning the most, you impact the success the most. But also, similarly, you want to look at the courses that lots of people take, right? Because, yes, you might find a course where that's true, but very few students take it. On the other hand, if you can find a course like that basically everybody takes, then impacting that course will have a huge impact across the whole curriculum, across the whole institution. So that's the analysis that is kind of undertaken, and I've done those calculations at now a bunch of different places. So I did begin by running those kinds of calculations when I was in Georgia, and we were able to find those courses for institutions in Georgia, and there was some work to undertake in a large scale redesign project that was done there. And now, similarly, we've run this analysis in Louisiana for all of the public universities and colleges. And actually, in the meantime, oddly enough, I worked with some universities in New Zealand and ran the analysis there. And so even though everything was upside down, it still seemed as though the ideas worked quite well. And so, so I think it is the case that this is a strategy that's easily replicated. And as I say, it's a tool, right? So this is a dashboard that we can produce, that we can give the information to campuses, and they can see this is the different impact that course redesign might have in the different courses at our institution. And then there's a conversation for the administrators at that institution to have with faculty members to say, okay, look, where are the courses where we can really have a strategy to improve and deepening the learning in this course, and look at the pivotal role that would have in the overall success of the students that we serve.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. So my background is working in community colleges, and so I was the VP of IE before I transitioned to Ascendium. And so what you're saying is I don't have to be a mathematician. I could take what you've created and plug in the data from my institution or any institution, and then it'll show like what the potential Catapult courses are within that institution, which is not the solution, it's part of the solution, right? So it's like you identify these courses, and then what do you do next? And so it sounds like you're saying, you deepen the learning. And so the goal is to move that grade curve up so more people are earning A's and B's in those courses, and even C's, depending on where you are, and less D's and F's. And so that'll increase their chances of having a higher graduation, like outcome or completion rate. Okay.
That's right. And I think a lot of this is really around, for instance, the way in which it opens a different kind of interaction with faculty members in really having this conversation at all. I think, for many of us who were involved in the redesign movements of the early part of the millennium, for a lot of faculty members, it felt a lot like grade inflation, right? You say, well, okay, look, first of all, people are having their finger pointed at them saying, look, the DFW rate in your course is too high. We need to fix that. And then faculty are like, well, okay, how do you expect me to fix it? And so, the pressure is, well, you should just reduce your DFW rate. There's nothing about learning there. It's just all about sort of changing having fewer people getting awarded D's and F's. Well, what this approach is really saying is, well, number one, we are selecting not the courses that we're trying to wave a finger and saying, look, you need to get your act. No, it's really recognizing these are the courses. All courses are important, but these are the courses that have a heightened strategic importance on this particular campus. And so that's the reason why it is that we are talking to you, whatever that discipline might be, you psychology department, you English department, you math department, you chemistry department, you first year experience course leaders, all of those kinds of courses. But more than that, then we're also saying what we want to do is to work with you to find strategies that help more students have a fuller mastery and deepen learning in your particular expertise, in your particular discipline. What faculty member doesn't want that, right? What faculty members turn around and say, well, no, I'd much rather that people have a much shallower understanding of what I'm doing. No, of course they don't want to do that. So in that sense, it really resonates. The question it asks is, well, what do you do to do that, right? What are changes that might happen in the classroom, in the structure of the course, in the pedagogy, in the way in which the course is structured or presented, that actually enable people who otherwise would not have been able to master this material to be able to master it more fully? And that's a very new kind of conversation and one we've not really had before.
Yeah, and it strikes me, and you talked about the DFW rates, and so I remember conversations with faculty over my career about, like, well, what do you expect me to just give them grades to increase my DFW rate? So it's more about like the faculty grade distribution, and this approach seems more of like a student-centric approach to DFW rates, and in that it's about, well, if students are more successful in these classes, it increases their chances to graduate or to persist. And so that conversation feels different than the ways we have approached DFW rates in the past, because your course has the ability to impact in a really significant way whether a student persists or completes. And so the next step is deepening their learning. Could you share a little bit about what are things that your faculty might do, or a faculty member at one of your universities are doing to deepening the learning in the class?
Yeah, no, happy to. And of course, the reality is that there's no one size fits all here. And the reality is that in different disciplines and different subject areas, different kinds of strategies are going to be really important. But the kinds of strategies that we are championing here in Louisiana as part of this are, so for instance, really focusing in on academic mindset kinds of strategies. So growth and fixed mindset, purpose and value, really helping faculty members realize the crucial nature of how it is that students think about themselves as a learner and how it is that they interact with the learning environment around them, and realizing that that is just as important, perhaps more important, than preparation ever has been. I know it was an enormous eye-opener for me when we started to do this research, to really see that that the way in which students approach their learning, if they have a fixed mindset and just simply believe, you know what, people like me just can't learn this stuff, well, that then in and of itself just gets in the way of helping them to overcome the challenging topics that they might meet. I mean, the reality is, it's part of learning. I think we've all been there. There is always going to be some challenging kind of concept that you have to kind of wrestle with, and that's just part of what learning feels like. But for many students, especially today, that feeling just means I can't do it. And I can't do it turns into I don't do it, and I don't do it turns into them ending up failing and leaving. And so enabling more students to have that growth mindset kind of aspect, and similarly helping them to realize what is the purpose of the course that you're taking. And, I think over the years, I've asked lots of students, why are you in this math class? Why are you in this English class? And the response I almost always get is, well, it's required. They're just making me take it. I never hear, well, you know what? English today is more powerful than it ever has been in human history. The written word is more powerful than it ever has been in human history. And so enabling me to use that tool both effectively and elegantly and powerfully is a really important thing for now and the rest of I never hear that answer. I should hear that answer more. And so helping people to realize that. So this purpose and value and growth and fixed mindset approaches, and helping faculty to know, well, these are the kinds of things that you can actually do in your classroom with your students to enable them to have that more of a growth mindset, and they help them to recognize the purpose of what it is that we're doing and the connection between that and them learning and mastering the material that I'm presenting. That's important. Similarly, techniques around tilt, right? So transparency in learning and teaching, really recognizing that the way in which you ask questions, the way in which you present the material, the way in which you present the expectations of what it is that you're trying to do, those things in and of themselves can these are simple changes sometimes, but those simple things can have incredibly powerful impacts. I'll talk about there's a powerful paper by David Yeager that it's called the Hero Essay paper, where he asks, or he analyzes what happens when some students write an essay about their hero. Essay topic doesn't really matter, but that's what the topic of the paper was about. And they analyzed what happened when the student received the feedback. So they received the feedback, and as you might imagine, that essay now has all kind of red all over it. So the faculty members gave all that feedback, did all that, but on a random sample of the essays, they put a sticker that says, I'm giving you this feedback because I know that you'll be able to use this feedback to improve your writing, and I know that you can really be a successful writer. And they also put some stickers on the other ones that said, I'm giving you this feedback so you'll have my thoughts about your writing. What happened was the people who got that positive reinforcement feedback that says, you know what, you can use this, you can make positive change, you can improve your writing, and I know that you can use what I'm telling you to do that, they were much more likely to redraft their essays, much more likely to be able to remove many of the errors that they have, much more likely to could persist in the course, all the kinds of things that we want to happen, just simply because the way in which they got that feedback was so much more clearly presented to them. What it was that the feedback was intended to do for them was so much clearer. So we are championing those ideas around transparency in teaching and learning. Similarly, trying to champion, the reality is that across learning science, there have been a substantial amount of insights over even the most recent past about how it is that as educators we actually can help people to learn the material that we're presenting. And again, the trouble is that for so many faculty members, and I'm one of them, I was well trained as a mathematician. I was never trained as an educator. And so recognizing that we can provide that professional development to faculty to help them to know what are the modern learning science ways that they can now take into their classroom in their discipline and the expertise that they have, and help many more students be able to benefit so much more greatly from what it is that they're presenting. So those are just a few of the kinds of strategies that we're trying to employ.
And like really important strategy. It sounds like you're giving the faculty the tools and encouragement to like engage with their students in a different way. And you didn't mention anything about changing content or student learning outcomes or any of that, because the faculty have that down, but it's how to engage, how to unlock self-efficacy within students in these particular courses. So as we think about Catapult courses, and other institutions may want to replicate some of this work that you've been doing, how should college leaders engage and support faculty and staff in this work of identifying and implementing, reforming these Catapult courses?
So at least, of course, what we're doing here in Louisiana is really, this is all embedded within this momentum framework approach to student success that we've been trying to operationalize over the last few years. And of course, a huge thank you to Ascendium for providing the support for us to really be able to do this. We have a convening coming up in just a few weeks, just at the beginning of April, where we'll be bringing together faculty, administrators, student success professionals from all across the state, from all 28 of our institutions. And there they will really be taking a deep dive into how do we operationalize this on our campus. And certainly I would encourage other institutions to do the same, and I'm happy to discuss with people kind of the methodology behind the Catapult courses. This is not it's not like a hidden secret. Happy to help them to think through, well, what would the strategic courses and to look at be on our campus, and then engage with faculty, right, to think through, okay, so if this is what the data at our institution is saying, well, then these are the courses where we need to lean in the most. Now let's engage with those disciplines, with those departments, with those subject area professionals to say, okay, so how might we now think through about ways we can support you in enabling many more of our students to deepen the learning in what it is that you are trying to present. And as you say, that's going to vary widely, institution to institution, subject area to subject area, but the importance of the work is just the same no matter where we are.
Yeah, and I appreciate you noting that the Catapult courses is part of this larger framework and strategy around increasing education attainment within the state of Louisiana. And so it's one of a suite of things that you guys are doing to move the needle for the colleges and universities there. So a final question. So you and your colleagues have been doing wonderful work in terms of really moving the needle. Dr. Hunter Reed, she came to one of our home weeks last year and talked about some of the work that you guys have been doing in Louisiana. And of course, that co-requisite work that you were able to do really quickly. Like, co-requisites have been around for a while, but it's taken other states a little bit longer to see like the impact that you guys have seen really quickly in Louisiana. So you've introduced this new model of Catapult courses. So I want you to tell us like what's next, what's like in the future as you go into this second half of Louisiana Prosper. Like what can we look for in terms of continue to reform the efforts in the state of Louisiana to increase the the college growing and attainment rate within your state?
Yes, I think it's a terrific question. So the next phase of the work is really to kind of push past what happens when students shake the president's hand and what happens after that. Because the reality is we now are scaling strategies that help more students complete their credential. What we now want to do is to really enhance strategies that enable people to make good on the credential that they earn after they graduate, to really make that connection between what it is that I'm learning in the classroom as part of my studies and how it is that I can now then take that into my career and on across the rest of my working life. And so it's all kinds of strategies that really try to, on the one hand, align what it is that's happening in the degree programs and the degree programs that we offer across our state with the needs in the world today and the demands that we see in the workplace, but also really trying to help students to connect what it is that they are learning and where it is that they're headed early, so that all the way through their journey they can then be able to make the connection between what they're learning and what they might do. So strategies around really improving career advising, helping students right from the very start. Probably, if you ever figure out what you're going to do with the rest of your life, you can tell me, because I'm still trying to figure it out for myself. But the reality is that, even when you begin your studies, we don't want it to be the case that you don't think about what you might do until the spring of the year you're going to graduate. We want you to be making those thoughts early. It may well shape the courses you take, the experiences you have, and more than that, really trying to amplify strategies around work-based learning, embedding those industry-based and short-term workforce credentials into the structure of the degrees that you're taking, all kinds of ways that we really can, in a similar way to what we did with dual enrollment, where we tried to connect college by helping people to begin that college thinking while they're part of high school, and do the same kind of idea in the degree itself or in the credential itself, to help people already be beginning to have those experiences, those thoughts, those connections, that networking experience, all of those pieces as part of the structure of the learning that they have in their educational experience. So that's the new piece, and there's all kinds of strategies that are already underway, and there'll be more to come soon.
Yeah, and Ascendium, we're wrapping up our strategy refresh, and that is consistent to where we're going as well. Earning credentials, great, but also are those credentials connected to the regional or local labor market needs, and our students set up for success to get a strong first job when they complete those credentials. And so excited to see and be a partner with Louisiana as you continue to do the work. So one last question. Is there something that you wanted to share that I haven't asked about today that you want to include in this talk or this interview around like Catapult courses and the great reforms that you're doing in Louisiana?
So I do want to say a big thank you, because the reality is that it's really important, I think, for me to do it. A big thank you to all of the hundreds of faculty and administrators across the state of Louisiana who are doing this work every day. And the reality is the Board of Regents doesn't graduate a student. That is not our role, but there are people who do. And so the only people who can make these transformations are people who are in the classroom every day, people who are on the campuses every day, who are working with the students. And so I do want to say a huge thank you to everyone for the receptiveness that they've shown to actually taking these strategies on and operationalizing them and making them their own on their campus in the ways that are really showing terrific impact. So yeah, a huge thank you to them.
Yeah, and building that like culture of transformation, like we're all getting better for our students together. And so it sounds like with the momentum framework, it's part of that. It's like building that culture of continuous improvement in service to student success. So Tristan, thank you so much for your time this morning and sharing with us this like innovative solution that I think is going to, you've done it in Georgia, now you're doing it in Louisiana, and I think it'll continue to scale around the country because it really is a asset-based, student-centric approach to really thinking about like a course that has the ability to impact the success of students, which is just a fascinating concept. So thank you